background that shows you just how critical this moment is and how we need to reorient ourselves to move into a different level of action as if we had landed on a different planet. We want to take you into a bit of a view in preparation for your think tank. So this is the main point of this conversation, which is how can we get to a mind shift where we say, how can we work together on creating a livable planet again by adapting, learning tools for adaptation, interventions for adaptation, for reduction, for removing what can't be there anymore, the toxins out of the oceans. Heike, I'm thinking of you. You know, there's a lot going on in the ocean set where we have to think about how to remove things, to cool things actively down and to restore. And so with that, you know, how do we envision this as a leader? How do you engage your people to create a community of action around what is, what's coming, and what must be done?
And I want to clarify one thing, because I think the cooling, we see things written about reducing and removing. Just to say for the cooling, there are a lot of people who are researching are the things that we can put up into the atmosphere, particularly in the poles, to reflect sunlight back.
Yeah,
so it's called active cooling. So it's not taking greenhouse gas out, it's sending sunlight back up in places to say, can we protect the ice? Can we keep things cool in the poles? The poles are warming even quicker than anything else. So just to kind of clarify what, because I think it's newer, it's not written about nearly as much as some of the other categories.
But you know, it's also, that's a really important point. So there we talk about terraforming kind of technologies and things of that nature, but think of you being a roofing company, right? And if you take that seriously and say, we just can't put up black roofs anymore, let's change that, right? Or whoever you are, think about those 5 elements that we need to.
So it's not always dealing with the gas. There might be something else to keep heat away.
Yeah. So with that, you know, we go back to that idea.
So one thing that groups are starting to do, often sometimes a few leaders, spreading it out into the companies, spreading it out across departments. And so looking at, again, making their own strategic map to the future that might have both, you know, what's happening outside where they get clear on those external trends, what they might do, how does that affect what we do, our product, our service, whether we're education or an NGO or a company or a government, and how would we organize, who would we engage, how would we, kind of new talents might we need and capabilities, what's our culture and our values, really getting a blueprint of that whole picture about where we're headed in the future.
So with that as a background, imagine you're a leader, you've gotten your people together, you thought about how does that impact who we are in the world, how we, the kind of products we're pursuing, you know, think back to the roof that's white now instead of black or whatever it is. How do we reorganize ourselves? What you can then do more practically look at, okay, let's take a look at our footprint. How could we reduce greenhouse gases, do whatever we need to do to reduce the size of our footprint? But also, more importantly now with that perspective, as moving into, you know, from one planet into another, is what are the regenerative things we must now do, right? What are the highest impact actions we can do to take, you know, to help with climate repair, climate restoration? Practical things that will make a difference around reduction, around removal, about cooling and restoration. And then
what kind of voice will we have? So if handprint is what we're doing, there's also something important about what we're saying, what we're, the people that we're getting to engage with us, how we're engaging other people. So we had started with footprint and handprint and realized that voice was equally important.
And then we talked with Emily.
Yeah.
And now we're really.
You have in your, one of you will be in a group with a voice. A person who
Exactly.
actually developed
Really
your voice.
right.
What
But
to
voice
say
is
with it.
important because voice, think back even to the Microsoft story. Once they have given themselves a voice, they then understand, hey, we need to connect with others and give, you know, make our voice heard and then connect with them. Or think of the leader of Walmart, right? He gave himself a voice around this topic. Now that allows for engagement that otherwise might not have been possible. So here's just a few examples, right? So this is a blueprint we did with an automotive
Right, so
supplier,
they made
right?
interiors and products for automotives inside of the cars. And so they looked at how to become more sustainable. And they'd been looking at their materials, but then they were also looking at their building and facilities, but their building didn't have that much room for solar roof. So they were thinking about, they were surrounded by a lot of agriculture farming lands. And so could they do something, a new field developing called agrovoltaics, where you shade certain plants that need it, but you also have lots of room to generate solar energy. And so that's where they use that to get the energy for their company.
And what's really remarkable there, it creates an entirely new relationship with their community where they
Yeah.
are, right? So that's what's so cool about that. Here's another really interesting example that was really relevant during the past, the storm that just happened in Florida, where there's one community 15 miles away from a town that was completely destroyed, Fort Myers. And they didn't, there was not a roof that had been damaged. The electricity never went out because they had 680,000 solar panels. They had designed a town specifically to be able to survive the kind of storm that Fort Myers did not, right? So that's the kind of stuff we're seeing.
So they had continuous power when so much of Florida all around them lost power for quite a long time.
This was a fun one. This is a local restaurant, and we had a conversation with the owner, Lumi Gardner, and with her, you see the personal commitment she made to this change. She made some really interesting choices about the products, has very unique and very specific demands of her suppliers and distributors, which now has led them to actually go to their other customers and say, look what we're doing. We're doing regenerative stuff, because they were pressured by Lumi to do it. Now they're in a new business. She's doing it all kinds of things with her employees. She's built it into the basic protocol of how they interact with their customers. The customers love it. There's incredible reviews, and they're now seen as a company with a voice, right? They are seen as a sustainability and climate leader. This is an interesting one from one of the colleagues. I don't know whether he's here today, but it's a local company called BioCare, an Australian company, and they make it possible for farming companies, plantations, to take their, let's say, sugarcane, for example, and turning into biochar, into an inert substance that no longer puts the carbon into the atmosphere, either as methane or as CO2. These are hugely important technologies that allow you to shift into this kind of regenerative world.
Another one that I like a lot that I saw just in the last week or so is one from Dutch students, and they invented cartridges that you put in cars and electric cars so that they pull in the CO2 from the air as they drive. And so they don't get a lot per car. It's not a huge mega facility, but there's lots of cars on the road. So if each car drives every day, gets the cartridge full, when they go to recharge the car, they have a place to put the cartridges, exchange to a new cartridge, drive the next day, and fill up a new cartridge. And so they're really designing first the cartridge for the car and the technology, and then the whole network or infrastructure of how to deal with that and how to collect the CO2 and where it can go.
So this is the second to last slide to kind of frame the conversation you're going to have in a few minutes. And that is, our dream really is based on this understanding that we must get on the highway to a livable planet, that we look at everything we do and think about how can it become an instrument for repair, for restoration, instead of simply an instrument for transportation, right? Instead of a container ship being something that moves from, let's say, China to Australia or to California or to wherever it goes to transport material, how could that ship become an instrument for repair? It goes through the atmosphere. There's stuff happening in the air. It could have sensors that identify, hey, wait a minute, there's a methane burst. Could we put some kind of an aerosol out to neutralize that methane? We're going through plastic in the ocean. Could we pick that up? Is there some capability where that ship becomes an instrument for restoration, an instrument for repair? There are nets floating around that shouldn't be. Can we pick those up? Do we have some kind of robotic arms that are attached to the ship and turn that into something that it is currently not?
There's research going on iron fertilization in the ocean, where very tiny, minute amounts of iron can fertilize the algae growth, and the algae draws down the carbon and then also becomes fish food as well. And so there are people who are trying to research that and see for these boats that are already out there, is that something that they could be doing? And so this is the last one of just understanding kind of the ripple of like the expanding circles of impact that we can have. It may start with a product or service, whatever it is that you're doing, to think, how can this thing that I'm making
Like
or
that
my
ship
day-to-day
or that car, right? Or that restaurant.
So whatever you're the expert in, how can you take your expertise and make it in that circle be something where you could say, what would it become in the regenerative era? It may also be the process. It may be from beginning to end, not just the output of what you're doing. It could be the facility, about where you're doing that. Where is that work happening? What could you do in that kind of facility in terms of energy or materials? What about the whole business model? Lots of groups have changed from selling a product to a service. The carpet that were saying carpet as a service, so they'd take it back and people wouldn't have to buy whole new carpets, but they just repair the part that needed repair. There've been lots of things over the years about looking at more sustainable business models. Sometimes then it could be the whole company focus, so not just particular areas, but what if you engage everyone? And how many people would have their own ideas because they'd know their own area better and they would know how to apply these principles to their own area. And then a lot of companies focus on it, but they don't go public with it. They don't make it their brand. What if you did bring in voice? What if you make it part of the brand and let people see what it is you're doing and spread not just all of these sustainable products and services and ways of operating, but send the story out into the world as well.
That goes all the way back to that signal we talked about around young people, right? Like you better have something like that if you want to be attractive to the young people who expect to work for a company.
Yes, they want to know it, right? So that makes a big difference in terms of what is the real, if it's an authentic brand, what is that identity of place they're joining? What are they doing and where are they going? You can engage your customers in that discussion as well. And then particularly important suppliers and partners, like in the seafood restaurant, right, is that they really got all of the suppliers and distributors to be interested in something that they might not have been interested in before, to really be educated and to know about it and to join in that work together. And then something that's going out for their industry to say, we're going to lead our industry. We're going to change our whole industry. We're not going to compete on this. We're not going to compete on these regenerative actions that we're going to take. We can compete on everything else, on our brand, on our customer experience, on what the product and service is, but we're not going to compete on climate. We're going to see together, how can we innovate and change our whole industry, work together on that, have leadership and advocacy.
So there are those choices, right? And now we want to send you off into think tanks. I'm going to hand back to Ivan in 1 second. But basically, we want you to think about this mind shift, right? If we really take seriously that we have to create a livable planet again through adaptation, reduction, removal, cooling, and restoration, what comes to mind? What comes to mind in your daily work, in the kind of products and services you provide? And so there we would like you to just think about this again, think about it in the context of footprint, handprint, and voice. What are you taking away from this new framing, and how might that inform you in terms of the kind of actions you might want to take?